Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC today, Rach, and I'm joined by my guest, W.M. Akers of Akers Games. Welcome to the show, Will.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
So, Will, how long have you been playing Powered by the Apocalypse games? What was your gateway?
I've been doing this for, around 4 years. The one that I fell into first was one that I think drew a lot of people in, which was Dungeon World.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I was walking around at my local neighborhood game shop, Brooklyn Strategist in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, and I saw the paperback on the shelf, and it was this tiny little paperback book, or rather very thick but small paperback book on a shelf full of like huge hardback impressive RPG manuals. And I was like, what's that little book? It looks weird. And I bought it and I was flipping through it and I was reading it. And I remember thinking, like, I have no idea what this is about. Like, there's moves and playbooks and, there's a manifesto, but also there's principles and, there's just all this different stuff in it. And I remember being totally baffled by it. And then somewhere around halfway through the manual, it all clicked. And suddenly I was like, oh my God, this system makes so much sense to me, and I want to run it so badly. So I ran a wonderful campaign of Dungeon World for my group. I ran an incredible campaign of Monster Hearts. I ran a lot of Night Witches.
Oh, yeah.
And it was wonderful because I have a group which is mostly actors, writers, people who didn't have like a really deep RPG background and whose eyes glaze over really quick when you get into very crunchy mechanical stuff. And it was so cool to have this kind of universal system that was simple enough that you could teach it to a new player in literally 5 minutes. And which was, there were so many different games based on it that we could play Dungeon World for 2 months and then be like, all right, great, here's this other game. You already know how to play it. It's slightly different. We're going to spend 20 minutes going over the differences, but basically you guys already know how to play it. And so it meant that as a GM, I was able to jump around from game to game to game without having to break my group into a new system every single time, because I love reading rule books. I love learning new rules, but casual players, it's just such a great way to get them to lose interest in the game.
Which one of those PBTA systems did you find your acting friends responded best to?
Definitely Monster Hearts. That game is more than any other system I've ever played. It does the best job of creating a universe in which all of the characters get to exist fully without necessarily all having to be working towards the same goal. Because, when you're playing Monster Hearts, it's not a party. You're just 2 to 6 or however many people who are moving through this world and moving through, in our case, a high school setting, and butting heads and fighting with each other and arguing with each other and oftentimes getting physically violent with each other or trying to seduce each other. So it allowed for a lot of just really intense, over-the-top role play, as well as very big feelings, which is what that game is all about, what I love so much about it. And a lot of PvP, which is just a thing that I've never seen so well handled in another game. That system is just so beautifully designed to put the characters in conflict in a way that feels natural. And all of my actor friends and writer friends responded to it by just going 110% all out every session. We had such wonderful games with it.
Read a sitch.
That brings us to our first segment, Read a Sitch, where Will and I will discuss various parts of play culture within the Powered by the Apocalypse community. Will, before the show, we were talking about the parallels between Powered by the Apocalypse and narrative structure. Did you want to go into that in more detail?
I would love to talk about that. I'm a novelist. I also have a background as a playwright. That's what I went to school for. And the thing that drew me into first Dungeon World and then Monster Hearts and every PBTA game I've ever read or played is how wonderfully all of the core rules, from the manifesto and the principles to the basic moves, seem to hew to dramatic structure, by which I mean every move anybody makes promotes conflict. So there's no way for the characters to act in any way without it creating more conflict and just driving the story forward. Which is wonderful because I've run other systems where it's possible for the story to just stall out and there's nothing mechanically that will light that fire and just keep it moving. But because in these games, like, literally the characters can't turn a corner, they can't say anything, and they certainly can't make a move without it propelling the story forward, that it means that as the GM or the MC, you don't have to worry about people getting bored because there will always be something happening. It'll always be exciting. And that to me is just so intoxicating and wonderful.
Can you think of a specific example at the table where your background in dramatic narratives really meshed well with the system?
Oh, absolutely. Really, I mean, it's not a, I guess not a specific example, but just the fact that the game is set up so that most of what happens is a weak hit
Mm-hmm.
means that, it's like the character is always halfway getting what they want, but also not quite, which is the essence of all storytelling. So it's because every story is all about what does this person want? What are they going to do to get it? Do they succeed or fail? And the answer is usually kinda. And that kinda is the thing that forces them to keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. So every time your players roll a 7 to 9 in a basic PBTA 2d6 system, it means that they're not satisfied and they always have to keep going forward and forward and forward. Another really wonderful, simple example is Dungeon World and some other games, including Comrades, my game, use the mechanic where if you roll a 6 or less, you get experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a wonderful, sort of simple manifestation of dramatic structure because every story is about characters failing, learning something, getting better, and then trying again. And so I just love the simplicity of like, you screwed up, which means you learned a little bit, and eventually you will improve. I think it works brilliantly, and it's so clear, and it's easy. It's also just so easy to teach.
Yeah, in gaming circles, it's sometimes called a fail-forward mechanic. And you're right, you can see that in lots of media and stories. The hero is what the protagonist will fail at doing something, but the plot still moves forward.
Yeah, it's great because, in a system, before I started running PBTA games, I ran a lot of Call of Cthulhu, and I love those games. Like, they're just a ton of fun, but it's a game from the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
That system is such that if your characters fail, a lot of times it just stops the story dead. And, I remember having just so many times where they're just walking around a room and there's something hidden in under a floorboard or something, and they just like keep looking, and it's like, we didn't find it. It's like, well, just keep rolling for spot hidden until they find it, or until the GM gets bored and is just like, look under the floor. But that never happens in a PBTA game, partly because you're not supposed to plan that much. So it's not supposed to just be something very important that they have to specifically guess to find, but also just because all of the rules are written so well that it just has to keep going forward.
Your example is so timely because just this morning I was talking with my partner Rob about his experiences playing Call of Cthulhu recently,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, okay, I get the appeal, but I can't stand the system. There's so much whiff. I feel like I'm missing all the time. I believe the quote was, I didn't respect Tremulous or understand why Tremulous, which is a Lovecraftian PBTA game,
Yep.
existed until I played Call of Cthulhu and got really annoyed.
Yeah, and it's such a great comparison because in that game, yeah, you whiff a lot, and when you whiff, according to the rules, all that happens is nothing.
Yeah.
But, if you're playing a PBTA session and you keep missing, that story is going to move along real fast. And it's going to get really ugly because it's just like, oh, you missed? Great. It's going to get worse. And that's another thing that's just straight out of dramatic structure is like, what do? You make the characters' lives worse. You just hit them harder and you give it to them in the neck and they respond or they don't. And no matter what, there's going to be a great story.
Because we were just mentioning the GM or the MC moves. Is there any particular GM or MC moves that you feel really work into this narrative structure idea?
I think most of the games have some variation on what I call in Comrades promise trouble and deliver trouble, which are very fundamental GM moves that you would use. What I've always found interesting about the GM moves in PBTA systems is that they're really just they are naming a thing that all GMs or MCs in all systems are doing all the time, and just sort of systematizing that and categorizing it, which when I was first learning the systems, I was really confused by. I was like, wait, so I have to be making moves? It's like, no, really, you just have to be making their lives harder. And here are like 9 different versions of making their lives harder. So I think the ones which are just like, there's trouble on the horizon, the trouble is here, are the most fundamental and simple and important ones, and they really just feel like what you're doing as a storyteller all the time. Just like, I'm going to foreshadow trouble, and then it's going to show up if they don't do anything about it.
Yeah, that observation of the MC moves being something that a lot of GMs are doing right away is something I've heard a lot of people mention, and they get hung up on the idea of, oh, I'm running this game. Why am I not rolling dice? Mm-hmm. Instead, I have a list of actions I could take that kind of keep the game on theme and on point. Mm-hmm. And once that clicks, it's like a day and night thing.
It really is. And yeah, when I was first learning Dungeon World, I remember it baffled me. But then once I was freed from having to roll dice, it's great because it's so lame when you're in a system where as the GM, you have to be rolling dice. And if the dice just keep going in a way that makes the story lamer, whether, it's by, like, you have this big tough bad guy who suddenly misses like 4 rolls in a row and dies really fast. It's like, well, that was lame. That was boring. And that can't happen in one of these systems, because in these systems, the big tough bad guy is going to be tough and cool and formidable, and it's up to the heroes to take them down.
Open your brain.
We're moving on to our next segment, Open Your Brain, where Will will be sharing with us his new game on Kickstarter right now, right?
That is absolutely right. Check it out. It is called Comrades, a revolutionary RPG, and it is a heck of a lot of fun.
Tell us a little bit more about Comrades. What's the game about?
So Comrades is a PBTA game about life in the revolutionary underground. Players play members of an underground leftist revolutionary cell who are living in a city or country that is ruled by an oppressive government, and it is up to them to do whatever it takes to take that government down. They can choose, whatever approach fits with their ideology, with what their characters want. They can be peaceful, they can be violent, they can be discreet, they can be over the top. But it is all about moving the country to the brink of revolution. It was inspired by sort of a lifelong fascination with socialist revolutionary history, whether that's the Spanish Civil War, the Russian Revolution, even the French Revolution. I'm fascinated by stories about tightly knit groups of people who are fighting against the secret police, fighting against the government, fighting against the army, fighting against each other, fighting against supposed allies within the movement, and despite all of that intense infighting, still moving forward in service of their ideals to try to make their world a better place. I think that one of the great strengths about a PBTA system is dramatizing dynamics in a tightly knit group of people, and I wanted to make a game that was all about just the tension and the intensity of living in the revolutionary underground, and so it was just such a natural fit.
Comrades, if I remember correctly, doesn't have a default setting, although there is a setting included in the game, correct?
That is correct. It's designed to work in any setting, past, present, future, real or imaginary, basically any place where you have an intensely oppressive, corrupt government that is oppressive enough that small groups of people would spring up in the underground to try to destroy it. You can play Comrades there. So there's examples in the book from New York City in 1777 during the Revolutionary War. The other example in the book is Callisto, a moon of Jupiter, far in the future during a miners' revolt. And then there's also a setting that comes with the game, which is there for optional use. I suggest it for one-shots or for people who just kind of want to dive right in without having to imagine up a whole setting with their group, which is in a fictional empire called Kresht in 1915 during World War I. It's sort of a dying Eastern European empire on the brink of revolution, inspired obviously by the Russian Revolution, but also other revolutionary movements that sprang up around that time. So it's designed to be very flexible, to really work as you need it, which I think is an important hallmark of PBTA games. But, in case you want to just have like a sort of straight ahead classic revolutionary setting, there's a framework for that included with the book.
In your wildest dreams, what setting do you really want players to maybe explore and pull apart?
Oh, that's a great question. A lot of people have taken a thing which is suggested in the book, and also is a thing that people just come to naturally, which is to play in present day United States or near future United States. I've heard from many different people who are just playing in their hometown, which I think is so cool. So one of my playtesters lives in Savannah, and they were playing a campaign set in Savannah, and it's great because it lends just like such immediate detail. You and your friends, you're going to the same pizza shop you go to in real life. You're going to the same club you go to in real life. You could set like your work is there, the people you know are there, and I love the immediacy of that and the intensity of that. I think for certain players it can be difficult to get away from the realism of that and then enter into the heightened reality that the game kind of demands. I would love for somebody to play this game and set it in like way, way, way historical. Like Rome under Caesar, I think would actually fit very well with Comrades. You wouldn't even have to change that much about the playbooks or the rules. I think it would work awesome, and I would love to hear about that campaign.
How are the mechanics in Comrades different from standard off-the-shelf Apocalypse World?
They are very familiar to anybody who's played or read Apocalypse World. I found while I was playtesting it that the simpler it kept the basic moves, the better they worked. So if you look over the basic moves, you're going to see a lot of stuff that feels familiar. I tried at every step to keep keep them as simple as possible, as clear as possible, so that people who've never encountered a PBTA game could pick it up, read it, and hopefully understand it fairly quickly, because I'm all about using these games to reach people who've never really gamed before. I think those are often some of the most fun people to have at a table. There are some, I think, very interesting differences. Perhaps my favorite is I've got a system in here called Pathways to Revolution, which are these 5 different tracks that your party can advance down, each representing a different approach you could take in dragging your country towards revolution. And so that's provided as an optional way of giving extra structure to the campaign. Based on what your party does during a session, you advance or don't in one of these tracks. And when you get to level 1, 2, 3, 4, you get a bonus that will help you out going forward. The world sort of reshapes around this new reality as your party gains strength. The dangers you fight become greater. And then once you get to level 5, you have an opportunity to try to seize power in the country in a way that matches your approach. So if your party is all about like going into the street and cracking skulls, you're going to advance up the force pathway. If your party is all about rallying popular support, you're going to be going up in zealotry, and you're going to be drawing huge crowds to your rallies and trying to topple the government that way.
Yeah, I had noted reading through the game the pathways mechanic, and that really caught my eye. What were the inspirations for the 5 different pathways?
It was just a lot of reading, basically. I wanted to make sure that I could find things that covered all of the different flavors a revolution can take. When I was last summer for doing research for this, I was reading a really fascinating new biography of Lenin, which opens up with the most interesting and detailed account I've ever read of the October Revolution, and it's a mess. Lenin is in hiding. He can't talk to any of his lieutenants. Nobody knows what's going on. They know they're supposed to stage a coup, but they don't know how it's going to happen. And when it finally does happen, they storm the Winter Palace. They basically just walk in and they seize power, and nobody even notices that it happened because their efforts were so sort of ham-fisted and chaotic. And I just thought it was so cool that, like, that counts as a revolution the same way that a military coup counts as a revolution, the same way that the storming of the Bastille counts as a revolution. And, like, all of those are so different. And I really wanted to give space for people to build a party that could try to accomplish a revolution in their own way that seemed interesting and appropriate to them.
Yeah, I also noticed with some of the pathways that they're a little bit loaded. For example, I believe the zealotry pathway implies that you're getting support from the upper class, which is not something we always think of in terms of socialist revolutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One level of zealotry is your cause becomes celebrated among the wealthy who flood you with money. When that's a thing where, I instructed the GM to, like, this is a bonus, it's going to help, but you need to also use it thoughtfully and think about, like, so now suddenly there's all this money coming into your party. Well, what does that mean? Who are these people who are giving it to you? What do they expect in return? Just like with any game, every good thing you give to your players has to cut the other way also. There are other, force is a pathway which is designed to be very seductive and very appealing, but also problematic, because I think one level of it gives you the option to adopt armbands or uniforms that terrify your enemies while you're walking through the streets. And that's obviously very deliberately designed to evoke brown shirts and to sort of force your group to reckon with the idea of, like, are we straddling the line between something good and something evil? Like, what are we actually trying to do here? Because everything about the game is designed to just force you to think about, like, what it takes to make political change, and how sometimes that forces you to step over the line into something that either you in real life or that your character in the game might consider immoral. But it's also supposed to be fun.
Fun, but not always in a happy way.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your favorite move in the game and why?
I think hands down my favorite move is Share a Quiet Moment. It's a basic move that gives you and one of your comrades an opportunity to, whether it's in the heat of battle or in the middle of an argument, just make a human connection and just do a little bit of really intense role play. I love when those moments happen naturally in a game, and I wanted to build a mechanic around it to encourage it. So it's a way that you can heal harm. It can give bonuses going forward. It can improve your bond. And it's a way to just make sure that the players are always, no matter how exciting the game gets, still taking a moment to connect to each other as role players and as characters. As a GM, I'm somebody who tends to run a pretty intense, fast-paced game, and so it's also in there to force me to slow down as a GM, because I can get carried away, and it's always better to take your time, let things breathe, and make sure that no matter how much fun everybody's having, no matter how exciting the story is, that they're still taking time to just like remember, just interact with each other across the table.
Given the timely nature of the game, what are you hoping players are going to take away from this game?
So I designed this game basically to remind people on the left, whether they consider themselves centrist Democrats or hardcore socialists or anarcho-syndicalists or whatever, just to remind them about how rich and deep leftist history is. There's an unfortunate stereotype in this country of wimpy liberals, and I think that that's terrible because 30, 40 years ago, the stereotype of people on the left was that they were intense, that they were angry, that they were going to do what it took. And so I just wanted to give people an opportunity to live in that reality for a few hours at a time. Because I think that if you get to play this game and remember, hey, being a liberal, being a leftist, being a socialist, whatever you want to call it, means being willing to fight for your ideals, being willing to fight for the disenfranchised, being able to do whatever it takes to make your world a better place. And that's actually brave, and it's intense, and it's cool. And so my hope is that people will play this game, feel that strength, and then go forward and carry it back into the real world. You should feel that strong when you're pushing for change, getting people to sign petitions, whether you're calling your reps, running for office, even just voting, and just remember that, you're on the left side of the spectrum, you believe in stuff and you're fighting, and that means that you're tough and you're intense and you're cool.
And by this country, we're referring to the U.S.
Yes, I'm in the U.S., you're in Canada. My mistake. This continent.
Oh, this podcast is international.
This hemisphere.
This hemisphere, this planet.
Yeah.
Politics might be different elsewhere. Although, given the presence of America within the social discourse, and especially the online one, there is that blurring where leftists and left terms do pick up that meaning across the board.
Yeah.
It is time to act under fire.
So it's time to move into our final segment, Act Under Fire, where Will and I are going to play through a small snippet of Comrades.
All right, ready to go.
Will, would you like to set up the setting tonight?
Yeah, so I think just for the sake of getting right into it, we will lean on the setting in the book. So we are in the city of Kresht, in the Empire of Kresht, on the river Kresht. The empire is crumbling around us. The Empress has declared war on the Germans. The Germans have just trashed the Kreshti army. They are racing toward the capital. Unrest is brewing in the streets of the city. And you are a student, correct?
I'm playing Athena, who is a student. A student is one of the playbooks. She is dressed in a patchy cardigan, which she swears is a fashion statement. She's incoherent that she often spouts out academic theories and ideals that are more intangible rather than actionable.
All right, and I think for the purpose of this, we should give you a comrade, just so you have somebody to play off of. Would you like to be somebody you get along well with, or somebody you have a little bit of friction with?
Oh, definitely friction.
All right, great. So I'll ask you one of the bond questions. Which comrade resents anyone with an education? Who in your group is really bothered by you as a student? Who is this person, and why do you guys have so much beef?
Oh, I'm going to go with Percy.
Oh, Percy. And let's say Percy is a worker. Tough, serious, strong, self-educated, self-made type, and just looks at you and your book learning and he's shaking his head.
Oh, definitely we're from different backgrounds. I mean, if life had played out differently for Percy, he and I would see eye to eye.
So write down bond -2 for Percy on your character sheet, and we will drop you two right into the thick of the action. So I think we're going to start off in the main central railway station in the center of the Empire of Kresht. There's a huge crowd here. They've spilled out onto the street. They're chanting. They are angry because there is a trainload full of unwilling conscripts who are about to be dragged to the front lines to serve as cannon fodder to try to slow down the German advance. So a group of a couple hundred mostly young boys, 16, 17, 18 years old, in their patchy blue Kreshti uniforms are hanging out in this grand, beautiful railway terminus, which has really seen better days. They're surrounded by a ring of police who are there to keep them from running away. And they're getting ready to, in about 5 minutes, start boarding this train. So orders have come down from your party to stop this train however you see fit. And before we get going, I want to know, Athena, what's the personal connection you have to this? Why is it so important to you to stop this train?
Oh, because my brother was conscripted to go out to the front lines.
All right. And what's your brother's name?
We'll go with Tony for my brother's name.
All right. Great. So Tony is there. Is he younger than you or older than you?
Oh, he's definitely younger. It's the whole older sister thing. I got to look out for my younger siblings.
All right, great. So he's there. He's literally shaking in his boots. He's clutching this worn Kresge rifle, and you're looking down from the top of the stairs, this grand, beautiful staircase that runs down to the main floor of the train station. You could see him there. And you're there with Percy, who I'm going to say, for the purpose of this, is a guy who's worked on the railroad. He knows his way around the terminal. And what's the plan, he says to you?
Athena takes a moment to look over the side of the balcony and tries to figure out the movements of how these police officers are positioned, trying to predict almost what's going to play out in the next few minutes.
Well, it sounds like that you are taking a moment to assess a person or situation, which is one of our basic moves. You're asking what's going on here. So give me a roll with mind.
So with mine, that would be a 10.
Fantastic. So you get to ask 3 questions from that list there.
What should I be on the watch for?
It's a great question. So you should be on the watch for, and you're picking up on this even as you think about it, you hear horses outside. And you recognize them just from the heavy tread of these horses that the Koshev Dragoons are on the march. They're being brought in. They're going to encircle the railway station and possibly even go out into the train yard as a way of just providing extra muscle to make those boys get on the train.
Oh, fabulous. So next question, of course, is what's the best way out?
There is a flight of rickety iron steps on the far end of this sort of raised balcony where you are, which lead down to a maintenance corridor that Percy has mentioned to you, which would take you straight out into the train yard.
And who is the biggest threat?
Oh, that's a good question. So there is a big, tough, extremely angry-looking cop whose name is Pyotr. And he is there. He's standing right next to your brother, and he's been arguing with him because your brother Tony has been. He's not running exactly, but he's squirming and he's moving. He's eyeing the exit, and Pyotr sees that and just keeps like jabbing him with his nightstick and just like pushing him back in line.
Take a moment and turn to Percy and gesture towards Pyotr and say, "Do you know that guy?"
He's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that guy. He was working here. He was a station cop when I was working here. He's an absolute sadist. He drinks way too much beer, far more than he can handle, and he is the type who he loves violence for violence sake, and he's one to avoid."
Well, it's not like we can really avoid him right now. What type of drink did he like?
He was particularly fond of the famous Kresge Black Ale.
You wouldn't happen to have any on you, right?
Well, he gestures to the railway station cafe where they're doing a booming business in serving Kresge Black Ale to the crowd of protesters. So everybody who's not screaming is drinking.
Oh, I really think the answer is step 1 is getting that cop to the bar and giving him a drink.
Percy seems to think that this is like an admirable idea. He's happy to see that you have hit upon the one thing that you guys really agree on, which is he drinks like a worker and you drink like a student, and in that you meet eye to eye. So he's happy to help with that however he can.
Fantastic. Well, my thought is I may go and ask this cop out for a drink, which really, for Athena, that's way out of her comfort zone, I think. Like, this is a really awkward situation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's read enough stories where there's that whole femme fatale thing, but she's never really applied it before.
Fantastic. I think it's a wonderful time to try new things.
So Athena's going to slip down into the crowd. Does she go unnoticed?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of people. As long as you're in the crowd, nobody's going to notice you. The closer you get to the cops, they're gonna notice you immediately. Because right now, the crowd is keeping a distance of 5 or 10 feet from the cops. There's sort of a no man's land in the middle that you'll have to cross unless you can find a way to draw Pyotr the cop to you.
Oh, I think we're going to try to sneak him a message.
Oh, fantastic. So how do you do that?
I am going to flirt with the nearest young gentleman and, quickly write down in a note, I've heard of you amongst, academic circles. Perhaps if you have a moment, we can have a drink and discuss police and policing theory and maybe some law theory. It is an awkward ass note.
All right. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. So I think that's her idea. She's going to try to pass a note to this police officer by encouraging the nearest young man to cut across the no man's land.
All right, so I think the nearest young man is a young, not terribly healthy looking reporter who's there trying to cover the story. His name is Bernard. And he is totally just like enchanted by your patchy cardigan and your bravery at like trying to win this cop's attention. And he says, with like all of a newshound's bluster, like, I'm absolutely willing to take that note for you. I think it's insane, but of course, anything I can do to help. So he walks over, he slides the note over to Piotr the cop, who stops bullying your brother just for long enough to read it. And I think that at this point you have attempted to do something far outside your comfort zone. So you're triggering the student move elective. So roll with spirit to see how you do.
Oh dear. So that's a 6. I think there's like, on my end, she nods towards the police officer. But what else happens?
So I think that 2 things are going to happen. The first is that he knows you. Because he's been tormenting your brother for a long time. He's seen your brother talking to you, and he puts this together immediately. So he grabs your brother by the cuff of his collar and drags him over to you. So that's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is the sight of this cop manhandling one of these young soldiers sends the crowd into like a fever pitch, and they start advancing towards the line of police officers who form sort of like a human shield to try to stop this crowd from moving any forward. So Piotr walks up to you, he's got your brother there, and he says, like, what the hell do you mean by this?
I just wanted to grab a drink. I've heard there's this black ale at the bar here. I mean, I didn't realize you wanted to get my brother involved. That's a little weird.
He says, you want me to go have a drink with you right now while this riot's about to kick off?
No time like the present.
All right, so what are you doing to him to try to like swing him this way? What's your approach?
I think my approach is being a little underhanded. I really want him at this point to lash out. I'm going to start something. We know that the crowd's getting worked up. Mm-hmm. There's a fever pitch here. I just want him to lash out in a way that's going to inspire all these young men to make a bold move, perhaps inspired by my incompetent bold move.
All right, so you are egging him on and just like pushing him. And I'm going to say that as he starts to respond to you, your brother laughs at him, which is perhaps not a great idea. So Piotr does lash out. He's been needling Tony all day, and Tony is finally sort of like struck back in his own way. So Tony just like laughs at him, and Piotr turns and he just smashes his nightstick across your brother's head, sends him right to the ground. So how do you respond?
How beat up is Tony?
Hurt, I would say. Maybe like a little blood in his hair, but he's on his knees. He's not unconscious or anything.
Oh, I definitely take a step forward and say, that was completely unprovoked. You and your men are outnumbered. You smack one of us down, you're going to have to deal with the rest of us.
So I think that it sounds like you were trying to provoke a crowd to strike, demonstrate, riot, or brawl, which is our basic move, start something. So why don't you give me a roll with spirit, and we'll see what happens.
That's a little bit better. That's a 10.
Fantastic. So on a 10 plus, it goes the way you want at first anyway. So tell me, how do you want this to go?
I really want this crowd to push back against the police officers, giving us enough space to maybe not just push deeper into the train station, but buy us some time that we can start evacuating people. Open up some space near where that exit is to make sure the exit isn't blocked off, and just delay the inevitable.
All right, great. So I'm going to say that the crowd charges the police officers. And they're screaming, they're making a lot of noise. The police, who are armed with clubs, not guns, just start striking back as hard as they can. And the sound of this is exactly what the dragoons from outside have been waiting on. So in front of you, you see people going after the cops. Behind them are these terrified soldiers who are armed but aren't doing anything with their guns. Behind you, through the great 25-foot-tall doors of this train station, comes a flood of cavalry. And they've got swords. So you're sort of right in the middle there. But at the moment, everybody's focused on their own thing. And I'm going to say far across the hall, Percy, who has slipped away, is standing next to this little service exit and is just waving at you. Just like, come here. Like he's got the door open and he's like ready to let you out with his mini soldiers so you can get out that way.
I'm definitely going to take a moment to grab Tony and try to pick him up. He is my younger brother. I should be able to lift him.
Oh, yeah. Well, then
he can hauling ass.
I think he's sort of staggering. So he's got like his arm around your shoulder, and he's just sort of muttering, just like you're so goddamn stupid. Thank you. I love you so much.
It runs in the family, evidently.
All right. So what's your plan? Are you just going to try to get him out, or are you going to run to the soldiers and try to get more of them out as well?
I think I'm going to call out to them and rally up anyone I can get that's nearby, and then hope that there's at least a game of telephone that's going to break out where people are going to overhear and then ripple through the crowd, and at least we'll get some of the boys out.
All right, great. So you're not trying to sneak. It sounds like you're doing this pretty in the open.
Yeah, the family is not subtle.
I think Tony's going to mutter that. We are not a subtle people as you rush across the beautiful, increasingly bloodstained marble floor. So I think that you are, by drawing attention to yourself, I think that you're taking a risk. So give us a roll with spirit, and we're going to see how this big move of yours goes.
Yeah, we're going to take a mad risk for the revolution. 11. Apparently I'm lucky if I'm not trying to play it cool.
Beautiful. Let this be a lesson to you in life as well. Never play it cool. So I'm going to say that the soldiers nearest to you hear this. They start passing the word along. And there's just like a stampede. So the crowd is occupying the cops. The cavalry are charging in with sabers and are, meeting the crowd. So there's just like instant and immediate bloodshed. But for the moment, nobody's paying attention to the soldiers. And happily, nobody is paying particular attention to Athena and Tony. So you were able to rush across the floor and escape the attention of the various mobs we have arranged here and get to the stairwell. And behind you, most of the soldiers are rushing that way as well. So do you charge down the stairs, or do you hang back to try to make sure that that everybody gets out?
Well, reckless as reckless does. Athena hangs out a little bit longer by the gate just to keep an eye out for when the cops and the cavalry try to rush us, so she could slam the gate shut on them.
All right, great. So Tony is there. He's screaming like, come on, sis, like, we got to go. We got to get out of here. We got to go. Like, it's time to leave. You're ignoring him. And finally, our friend Pyotr notices that the soldiers are rushing out, turns, he sees you, makes eye contact, and he blows with this whistle that just like cuts through the thick air of the train station. And suddenly, every cop in the place and every dragoon in the place, they are all just charging across the floor right at you. Percy is gone, by the way. Percy has booked it.
Yeah, Percy's smart. I'm going to wait till the last possible moment. And I know it's going to hurt. We're going to have to make sacrifices here until I'm able to see the pupils of like the closest cop to me. That's when I'm going to slam the gates.
All right. So I'm going to say
the whites of their eyes.
Just for the sake of drama, there is one last private, this skinny, just like frightened kid. He looks like 14 years old. And he's the straggler. He's just like, it seems like 6 inches in front of the blade of the nearest saber, and he's charging as hard as he can run, which is not very fast, and he's almost at the door, and you're there waiting, and he comes right past you. You can smell the sweat and the fear on him, and he books it past you down those stairs, and there's this guy on horseback right behind him, and you are taking a risk by hanging out to try to slam this door before the dragoon gets to you. So why don't you roll with spirit again?
It would be a 9. Not so good this time.
Well, this is not terrible. This is a weak hit. So on a 7 to 9, your risk pays off, kind of. I'm going to say that this guy, he manages to swing his sword down like right as you're about to shut the door. You take a really nasty gash down your left arm, which is good for 1 harm. But otherwise, you're able to shut the door and pull it shut and lock it behind you.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So you got out, man. You saved the soldiers. You saved your brother. And all it took was 1 harm. Very nicely done.
It's just more encouragement for more reckless behavior later.
That's exactly right. So if this were a proper session, you'd be finishing it up. At the end of it, you would make rolls to advance on the different pathways to revolution. And I think this would be one where you could definitely advance in zealotry because you've done something very high profile, a way to like sort of inspire people. And so you could make a roll. In that case, you would roll with spirit. And if you rolled a 10 up, you would get to advance a level in this track and you get a bonus for next time.
That was so awesome.
I liked it too. I really, really liked this game.
Will, if people are interested in your work or your Kickstarter, where can they find you online?
There are a couple of different places. I'm on Twitter at Ouijum, Ouijum. You can also learn more about my work broadly at wmakers.net. You can find the Kickstarter by searching kickstarter.com Comrades. It should come up. And the other important thing is I've got a mystery novel coming out on May 7th called West Side. That is one word, West Side, which they can and should pre-order from their local bookstore.
Amazing, and thank you for joining me again tonight.
This was a total blast. Thank you so much. Thank you for saving those poor Kreshti boys.
Anytime.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at +1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.